An audio excerpt of Charlie, Rentboy, written by J.P. Barnaby and narrated by William Cooper. When I was a young, tousle-haired boy, my mother told me I could be anything I wanted to be. A fireman, a teacher, even a pro wrestler. I'm sure she never guessed that I would grow up to fuck strange men for money. So thank God we skipped that little chat when I went home for Christmas, because a stroke would have put a damper on the old holiday spirit. Hi, my name is Charlie, and I am a rent boy. Why, you might ask? Because college is fucking expensive, and if I'm going to become an engineer at some point before I die, I need to pay for school. So the question is, do I want to make $7 an hour at McDonald's, or $250 for an hour-long out call and still have time to study? Yeah, that's what I thought. Now for that $250, guys definitely get their money's worth. I'm easy to talk to, charming, and I've been blessed with an amazing ass. Besides my brain, it's by far my best asset. And even though I'm versatile, my ass is what's showcased on my escort ad, which means I get hired at the bottom. A lot. That's cool though, since it pays my rent and keeps me in textbooks. I even get to eat when I remember between classes and clients. My ad also says that I'm 21, which is true, 5 foot 8 inches and 140 pounds, which is also true, and that my name is Charlie, which isn't. My real name is something rather mundane, like Timmy or Paul, but you don't get to know that. I shield my identity like Clark Kent or Peter Parker, except my superpower is far more fun than strength or swinging from buildings. I am able to bottom tall tops in a single fuck. I can suck the chrome off a bumper and leave the car still standing. In other words, I am sexually gifted, a hero among gay men. What my ad doesn't tell you is that I have shaggy blonde hair that's great to grab while being fucked from behind, and sweet, innocent blue eyes that look very enticing when I gaze up with a cock in my mouth. See? Hot, right? My own cock is pretty average, nothing I haven't seen a dozen times on a normal Chicago night. One thing to remember though, I'm always safe. If you want to bareback, don't bother calling. But if you want me for the weekend, it will cost you a shade over $1,000. Interested? Yeah, I would be too. So when I got a call from John, because they're always John, which I personally find amusing, or Neil, or sometimes even Bob, it didn't surprise me. He'd been trolling on Rentboy and had come across my ad. I'm sure he would have rather found me on one of the hookup sites I used to blow off steam, or maybe in a bar somewhere, but instead he went the paid route. Anyway, John was coming into town on business, I didn't ask what kind, and wanted a weekend, which surprised me. Guys will usually try before you buy for an hour or two before springing for a weekend. I guess John had money to burn. We got down to brass tacks and talked about a museum tour, maybe a night at the ballet. Of course, we also discussed blowjobs, topping, bottoming, and maybe a light bit of roleplay. Sure sounded like an easy weekend and definitely worth my time. At least that's what I thought, until he fucked up my life. It started out like any other trick. I made a safe call, letting a friend know where I'd be and with whom. No way I wanted to end up tied up in some freak's basement because I reminded him of his high school sweetheart or some shit. Anyway, I left the deets, packed a weekend bag to my client's specifications, and hopped the brown line down to the loop. Of course, guys like John always stayed on the mile. Where else would they stay? Guys with more money than looks always treated themselves to the best, including weekends with me. Hey, just a couple more years and maybe I'd cash out and join them. A bored voice on the garbled speaker called out the stops, but I practically lived on the L, so I tuned it out and went back to the book I'd started reading on my phone. It gave me something to keep my mind occupied with other than the dystopian-style graffiti on the wall or the funky smell of urine mixed with cheese. Guys stood in their polos and dockers, holding on to the pole, looking like Geek Squad go-go boys. A homeless guy tried to pull a scam pretending he was deaf to get extra cash, but jerked his head around when a kid screamed at the back of the car. I gave him $1 anyway. My whole life had been lived with a limited number of choices for my mom and me. I got what that felt like. I restlessly went back to my novel and wished I'd brought my calculus homework because I had an assload of problems to do for Monday. But some guy paying me to bend over the sofa didn't need to know about school or my dreams. They didn't get into my life. Ever. People assume I'm uneducated, that the sum total of my skills consists of sucking cock and holding my legs in the air. They didn't need to know a thing about the boy behind Charlie. As long as they paid, what the fuck did I care? The train ride flew by, and I was soon on the stairs to street level. I did a quick check around me to get my bearings, tightened up my backpack straps, and then hopped onto the number 66 bus. It would take me up to Chicago and Michigan, just a couple blocks from the hotel. No reason to add the expense of a cab. I had plenty of time before John expected me to knock on his door. After a few minutes, I stepped down onto Michigan and headed south towards the 700. I watched the little worker ants scramble along about their day. Mrs. Executive pushed a stroller she paid no attention to as she babbled on her top-of-the-line smartphone. She'd covered her face, too tight to be natural, with expensive cosmetics from Macy's, no, maybe Saks, in a sad attempt to hide her aging skin. Poor thing. Hubby was probably off pumping one of his interns, or maybe getting his dick sucked by his own little rent boy somewhere. Mr. Sales Guy fiddled with the buttons on his jacket as he spouted politely exasperated quotes into the headset on his ear. Me? I just walked calmly along toward the guy who would spend the weekend with his cock in my ass and pay handsomely for the privilege. A cab honked, grabbing my attention as I crossed the tail end of a walk signal. I might have flipped him off, depending on my mood, but today I needed to get to my appointment without drama. The hotel, one I'd been to before, was a high-end option set against the skyline. Whoever John really was, he had money, or at least his company did. The doorman at the hotel didn't give me a second glance when I walked through the revolving door into the lobby. I'd gotten lots of gifts from clients over the past year, including a pair of diesel jeans and sweet Versace sunglasses. I didn't have a suit in that league, so I didn't bother, but the jeans alone were enough to get me through the door without garnering attention, and I fit in nicely with the casual clientele. I don't particularly like attention, at least not from punchy little desk clerks and their speed dial to security. A quick glance at the text on my phone told me I needed to head up to 2405. Every damn hotel layout was different, and I forgot where the elevators were, so I checked with the desk clerk and found out they were hidden in an alcove off the lobby. Why the fuck would you hide the elevators? I ended up trapped next to Sally Sunshine, who didn't shut up for 20 goddamn floors. When she asked why I was in town, I nearly told her just to render her speechless, but I didn't need trouble, not with a $1,200 paycheck, plus tip, at the end of the ride. So I smiled at her, my patented pussy-wetting, dick-hardening smile, and told her I was here on business. She stammered a bit for the next few floors, but finally the doors opened and she stumbled out. Literally, since she snagged her foot on the gap in the floor. She caught herself just in time not to face-plant into the carpet, and I tried not to laugh as the door closed. Honestly, I did. The doors opened again almost immediately, so I shuffled out onto 24, making sure to step over the gap, and checked the little brass-looking sign to see that 2405 would be to my left. It happened to be at the end of the hall, a corner suite. Well, of course it was. John wouldn't have had it any other way. I followed the burgundy Persian knockoff carpet, checking my reflection in the sole dimly lit mirror I passed, though the window at the end of the hall brightened up the space near his room. I knocked on the door and slid my backpack off one shoulder so I didn't look like a little boy on my way to school. A bit of fumbling behind the door, and then it opened to frame within it one of the most beautiful men I'd ever seen. Shit.